Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Remind me to always have a very tall seminarian. Thank you. Especially when we have a brand new Paschal candle. If you've been coming to Easter services regularly over the past few years, you might find yourself a bit confused after listening to Deacon Hank read the Gospel story. Maybe you're wondering, don't I remember something about a gardener last year? And didn't Jesus call Mary by name? Wasn't that the whole point? And there was a race between a few of them? Well, I'm happy to tell you that you're not crazy, that that was John. This is Luke. And then there's Matthew. And then there's also Mark. And no, they don't all agree. Let's start with Matthew. The women arrive, and the stone is still in place. There's an earthquake, and the angel rolls back the stone. They find the tomb empty, and the angel tells them he's not here, he has been raised. Jesus is already gone, and a little later, they meet him in the garden. In Mark, which reads sort of like the Cliff Notes of the Gospels, the women arrive. The stone is already moved aside. There's a young man sitting there, and he tells them that Jesus is gone. He's raised. He is not here. In John, the story most often read on Easter, because it's got a lot more detail, Mary arrives alone, and she finds the tomb empty. She runs. She gets Peter. There's a foot race, and then Jesus appears to Mary, and when he calls her name, she recognizes him as her Lord. This morning, we heard the Easter story from the Gospel of Luke. After the Sabbath, a few women, Mary included, go to the tomb. The stone is already moved, and they find two men dressed in white, and the men speak to them. "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" they ask. "He is not here. He is risen." And the women go and tell the others with some mixed results. There are, however, a few common themes among all four gospel accounts. The women are the first to go to the tomb, and that makes sense because it would be their job as women to prepare the body, and also they wouldn't raise a lot of attention. Jesus' body is gone when they get there. None of them see that. And they're all told he is not here, he is risen. All the rest are the details. So first let me state the obvious. There were no eyewitnesses to the resurrection. No one saw exactly what happened when it happened. These are all stories about what happened after the resurrection had already occurred. And these stories differ, not surprisingly, because just ask a few people to tell you about this sermon after the service, and I promise you'll get 3 different answers. And even better, ask them to describe the liturgy or the flowers, and you may wonder if you were even in the same church. I know that when people are presenting evidence for why the resurrection just couldn't have happened, or why they can't possibly believe in this Christian story, the discrepancies around stories like this are part of their argument. And maybe they give you pause also. After all, if the Bible can't get an important story like this straight, how can one believe in any of it? These stories about what happened after are related by different human beings in different communities at different times, and they're meant to be a means of revelation, not the objects of our faith. We don't believe because of the accuracy of the story. So why or how do we manage to believe? Faith is first a gift given by God. And it's also something that grows in us through the testimony of others. People whom we trust, people whose lives testify to the power of God working in them and through them. Stories of faith, of presence, evidence of transformed lives and loving service. Trusted testimony of people known to us, witnessing to the power of God. This is why we believe. Let's look at the gospel before us today, Luke. The women arrive at the grave and they're ready to go to work. But two men, angels perhaps, appear to them and they quell their fear and they speak to the women and they remind the women of what Jesus had been telling them all along when he was with them. That the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified and on the third day rise again. Then they remembered his words. The words of the one that they had followed and loved and revered as their teacher, their friend, and their master. And they believed. These women had been there all along. They had seen it all, and then he had been taken from them. Imagine how they felt then about all the things they were trying to believe. But now they remembered what he had told them, and they did believe. And suddenly, it all made sense to them. The resurrection was connected to the words and the actions of Jesus, grounded in the experience that they understood and an experience that they were all part of. And they believed. If only it were that simple for us. The story of God's love and God's triumph over death and despair is a story that we all need to hear over and over and over again. It's a story of hope and a story of new life where there was none. We are those who live on the other side of the resurrection, and we have the privilege of knowing that God is with us and that neither death nor life can separate us from God's love. How is that being lived out in your life? When we tell the story, our story, remember how lost I was. Remember how you had given up hope. Remember when you were alone or weary or sick and grief-stricken, and the hands of fellow Christians lifted you up. Remember. The mystery of the resurrection becomes real in everyday life of human living and relationships, in the stories that we tell, in this holy and imperfect community we call the church. And our world needs that story. Luke tells us that the angels also said something else to the women. They said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" The angels asked the women why they're there at a tomb looking for living water, living bread. Why do you look for life among the dead? Have you been there? I know that I have. Have you ever beaten your head against the same door over and over again and you just can't understand why it won't open for you? And if it does finally open, you're given the same unsatisfying answer over and over again. Why do we look for life where there is none for us? I think that all of us are a little afraid of new things. I think we're all a little afraid of leaving the tried and true behind and of the unknown. And so we go back to the same old over and over again, knowing it can't really feed us, but unsure of where to look instead. We hold on to old ideas. We grasp at our loved ones. We refuse to allow people or institutions to change, and we stay with what we know in our hearts is dead to us. Out of a desire to stay safe, to avoid risk, to hold on to whatever illusion of control we have about our lives and the lives of others. But the Holy One dwells where new life bursts forth. Behold, he says, I am doing a new thing. Come and see. Stop hanging on to the dead and step into new life. Jesus can be found among the living, among disciples serving as the hands and feet of Christ in this world, in our world. These are the stories that bring us to belief. These are the stories that can lead to new life. And each of us must claim our own story and tell it to the world that's very much in need of hope and love and forgiveness. Theologian John S. Whale once said that the Gospels don't explain the resurrection explains the Gospels. I agree. As crazy as it sounds, I believe in the resurrection. I believe that Jesus rose on the third day, even though I can't prove it, and the biblical witness to it is far from clear or concise. We have no first-hand account of the event. No one was there when Jesus threw off the linens and emerged, and no one saw it happen. But I believe because of the power of the resurrection to change lives, real lives, of people I know and I love. Cowardly Peter was turned into a great preacher. Saul, the persecutor, became a great missionary. Ordinary men and women, just like you and I, many uneducated and ill-equipped, spread the gospel so far that here we are in 2016 still talking about it. They became saints and martyrs, preachers and prophets, activists and organizers. And they're still telling the story, telling our story. Stories of finding life where there was none. Stories of hope and love, transformation and peace. Generation after generation, we make our way to the empty tomb. And we hear the words that rock our world. He is not here. He is risen. Amen.